Heyo everyone! If you've been watching this channel, then you know that I love talking about video games. Video games can be fun, relaxing, or even comforting. On the other hand, they can also be incredibly violent. Since quite a few children enjoy video games, it is understandable that some parents may want some reassurance that the media their little love brat is consuming won't traumatize them any more than the current world events already will. Back in the 90s, parents would make quite the ruckus over violent games like Mortal Kombat, Doom, and later Grand Theft Auto 3. So much so that the gaming industry knew it had to do something. They eventually decided to create some sort of panel to rate the appropriateness of a game's content. This way, they could shift the blame from themselves to negligent parents who don't pay attention to what their kids are playing. A real pro gamer move if you ask me. It's important to understand that the industry didn't do this out of the kindness of their heart though. No. They knew that if they didn't appeal to the angry parents and regulate themselves, then the government would step in and do it for them, resulting in far less control for industry leaders. Maybe that would have been better? I don't know. Based on how the government usually operates, I can't imagine it would be much of an improvement. I'm just being serious. So in 1994, the Interactive Digital Software Association, later known as the Entertainment Software Association, or ESA, founded the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or more commonly known as the ESRB. The ESRB has had a large impact on the gaming industry and continues to do so today. So, I wanted to take a look back at a brief history of the rating board and share a little bit of that history with you guys. Back in 1994, the ESRB released their original 5 rating categories. They were EC, which is for early childhood, which would basically be games that were mostly educational, K through A, which was kids to adults, and these were games that were more suited for just entertainment purposes, T for teen, which featured titles that included suggestive themes, crude humor, and strong language, M for mature, or 17 and up, which included games that featured intense violence, sexual content, and or blood and gore. And last but not least, AO, which stands for adults only, also known as the kiss of death. This is for games that feature extreme levels of violence or sexual content. I presume these games are the ones that people see ads for on adult video sites? I don't know. I've never been on one.
Yo, ever heard of Jerkmate?
Eventually, K through A was changed to E for everyone, and the addition of E10 Plus was also included, which is just for everyone 10 and up. Games that hadn't yet been rated were also given the label of RP, or rating pending. Although there is a wide range of ratings, most games have been rated E during the ESRB's lifespan. Just to put it into perspective, 70% of all games that have been rated by the ESRB are E for everyone, while an overall 94% of titles have been rated either E, E10 and up, or T. Is this why boomers think video games are for children? Side note, did you know that the average gamer is 31 years old? But what do all these ratings even mean? Who cares about these if they're just arbitrarily made up by a group of people who are just horny for power? Well, in case you didn't know, the video game industry was on the verge of complete collapse in 1983. However, a little red plumber brought salvation to gamers across the world and saved the industry from its inevitable doom. Because of this phenomenon, Nintendo flew to the top of influence among game developers in the 80s and 90s. Another gaming giant that rose to power at this time was Sega with their hit game, Shaq Fu. In the early 90s, Nintendo with Mario and Sega with Sonic were two of the major powerhouses in the industry. However, they had two very different views on what should be acceptable in video games. In 1992, Mortal Kombat was released for the SNES and Sega Genesis, and it stirred up quite the controversy. The game was scrutinized for its depiction of violence and, apparently to some US senators, was corrupting the very basis of society itself. It's not that deep, man. It's just an arcade game. I'm not kidding though. Senator Herb Kohl of Wisconsin argued in court hearings that video games were corrupting America's youth. God damn it, Herb. You're giving us Wisconsinites a bad rep. Nintendo believed that Mortal Kombat was too violent for younger audiences, which was their primary target, so the fighting game was censored for the SNES to remove anything that Nintendo believed to be overly violent, which was pretty much all of the blood and cool stuff that makes a Mortal Kombat game Mortal Kombat. Sega, on the other hand, kept everything as is and, as a result, helped increase sales of the game for the Genesis. As politicians and parents became more and more interested in the content featured in these type of video games, the industry knew they had to do something before being forced into regulation by the government. You know Captain America Civil War? It's kinda like that. The industry was under scrutiny and had to prove that they could behave by themselves or be forced to be overseen by the government, in which case they would have far less independence on what they could and could not do. Going back to the 90s, Senator Cole and his colleagues liked to cite the fact that there was no regulation in the young gaming industry and believed that because of this, corrupt ideals could be displayed in video games and spread among the nation's youth. Just like I said in my intro, the ESA was formed to counter these allegations and soon created the ESRB. But who exactly made up this guild of game developers? Well, the companies that banded together were the major powerhouses of the early 90s, such as Sony, Capcom, Sega, Nintendo, Electronic Arts, and others. I don't know, that's all I could find. What is this, some kinda entertainment software association squad? The ESRB rating system seemed to do enough to satisfy Cole and parents of the 90s because threats of government intervention slowly died down over time. The government wasn't just going to let this fly under the honor system though, so to ensure that the ESRB would actually be effective, Nintendo and other developers created these lockout chips to enforce game licensing. Essentially, if the game wasn't rated by the ESRB, then these unlicensed games wouldn't play on the console. Soon, all game developers agreed that third-party titles would need to be licensed by the ESRB to be approved for their consoles, officially at least. As the ESRB continued to develop and grow influence in the gaming industry, they realized the need to also monitor how games were advertised, particularly to children. In 1995, the ESA created the Advertising Code of Conduct and the Advertising Review Council to oversee it. This guideline provided rules for how developers and publishers could advertise their games. Basically, anyone who uses the ESRB rating system also has to follow the Advertising Code of Conduct. This guideline is for all commercial messages and/or marketing materials related to the promotion, consumer testing, or sale of a product or service distributed or disseminated through any medium currently known or hereafter developed. It should be mentioned that reviews, journalistic reports, or TV shows that are not being produced or sponsored by the game maker do not have to follow any rules. It's anarchy out there in cyberspace, fellas. Be careful. The reason why this code of conduct is so important though is because the council judges a game's advertising not by how gamers will receive the marketing, but how the broader general public will. The guidelines and principles are pretty standard stuff. All ads should be made with a sense of responsibility to the public. No ad should contain anything that would cause widespread hysteria among the average consumer or boomer really. Companies can't target audiences that their game isn't rated for. For example, games rated M cannot be advertised to children. Ads cannot flaunt, glamorize, or exploit their ESRB rating to help their campaign. And finally, an advertisement should accurately reflect the product's nature and content so as not to mislead consumers to what they are purchasing. Someone should mention that last one to CD Projekt Red. I'm sure that's groundbreaking information to them. I'm kidding. I just have to do my obligatory Cyberpunk 2077 dunk. You know how it is. And there's some other stuff that needs to be avoided, like excessive violence, gore, abuse to children, molestation, degrading behavior toward women, animal cruelty, dismemberment, arson, targeted violence towards a political or public figure, alcohol and drugs, profanity, religious bigotry, racism, desecration of sacred ideas held by a culture, and sex. Well, that's just ridiculous. These are the things that make me want to buy a game. Okay, so we just went through a bunch of rules, but who actually really cares about this? I, for one, would love to see a more sexualized Tom Nook, so who cares if the ESRB's rules are broken? You might find this surprising, but the ESRB would actually care quite a bit. These rules are in place for a reason. However, they're just a bunch of without any sort of punishment. Cue the ESRB enforcement system. Earlier I mentioned preventive measures like the lockout chip, but as more games go digital, the ESRB had to come up with some sort of actual way to punish rule breakers. If a developer or publisher does anything to break the ESRB guidelines, they are legally bound to punishment via points, corrective actions, monetary fines, or the removal of one good noodle. These fines can get up to $1 million, so it's not just a slap on the hand and calling it good. On top of all that, the culprit must also take corrective actions to fix their mistake. If it happens to be a game that got rated incorrectly, then the ESRB has to go through the whole rating process once again. For digital games, it's not as big of a deal because they can just update the online retailers. Redoing physical games that may have already shipped though is just a huge dumpster fire, and I don't even want to get into it. A monetary fine of $1 million isn't really that big of a deal in an industry that brings in over $180 billion a year, but it apparently does enough to help keep publishers in line. According to the FTC, the guys over at Big Brother who monitor the media and communications industry, the ESRB has the most effective ratings enforcement out of any industry, including movies and music. Essentially, it's a lot easier to get into an R-rated movie alone than it is to buy a Call of Duty game without your mom. According to the ESRB, most stores require customers to present photo identification when purchasing games carrying the ESRB's highest age ratings, and do not stock games which have not yet been rated. There are a bunch of studies you can find to help back up this claim, and it's reliable enough that many government officials actually cite the ESRB when it comes to video game regulation, which seems to happen every time old people need to blame something besides themselves. Yes, Barbara, I agree. If kids these days weren't always playing those darn Nintendos, then COVID wouldn't have happened, cancer would have been cured, and Jesus Christ never would have been nailed to the cross. What a shame. Anyway, the ESRB has really come a long way since its introduction nearly 30 years ago. They're still making changes to how they monitor the gaming industry today, and recently begun rating online features and adding content descriptors to online heavy games. They have this new digital rating service that warns consumers if a game has online features and that there may be user-generated content on said game that may be offensive, or weird creepy people who will try and dox your kids. But it doesn't stop there. After the controversy of Battlefront 2's microtransactions, the ESRB began rating in-game purchases, like DLC, and labeling games that had loot box-like transactions. Okay, that's a lot. Obviously there is so much more to this, but this video is already way too long, and frankly, I don't want to do any more research. I never even talked about Brown v. EMA and the infamous hot coffee case. Maybe sometime in the future I'll do a deeper dive into those topics because they are fascinating. If you somehow managed to make it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch these videos. I hope you enjoyed this and maybe even learned something? God, what am I becoming? Thank you guys, I appreciate you as always, and I will catch you on the next one.